Welcome, everyone. I am Elizabeth Goldstein, the president of MAS, and we're delighted to have you with us as part of our series of Masterworks programming. Established in 2001, the Masterworks Awards recognize design excellence in the built environment of New York, rooted in the broader MAS mission of advocating for a more livable city since 1893. This year's awards could not have been possible without the following jury members who dedicated their time and expertise in selecting the 2021 honorees. Justin Davidson of New York Magazine, Lisa Switkin of James Corner Field Operations, Weston Walker from Studio Gang, Vicki Weiner from Pratt Institute, and Calvin Tsao, who I'll speak about a little bit later. I would also like to thank the MAS staff for coordinating today's event. The presentation of our Masterworks Awards typically takes place as a ceremony award for all honored categories. This year, we reimagined the program to offer deeper ways for the public to connect with the design community and hear about honored projects across the city. The Neighborhoods Now Bedford-Stuyvesant received special recognition for excellence in community engaged co-design. The 2021 Masterworks Jury applauds the Neighborhoods Now team with great admiration for the many community members and stakeholders who came together for this co-design process. This is an innovative example for those in the fields of design planning and placemaking that we all should be looking to in the future. The Neighborhoods Now citywide program was a collaboration between the Van Allen Institute and the Urban Design Forum. We are joined today by Dan McPhee to help us understand the genesis and purpose of the program. Daniel is the executive director of the Urban Design Forum, an independent membership organization confronting the defining issues of New York City's built environment. During a 6-year tenure, Daniel has built the Urban Design Forum to become a network of 750 design, development, and planning professionals. Dan, please take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dan McPhee, and happy to be here to represent my colleagues at the Forum and our partners at Van Allen Institute. It's my sincere pleasure to congratulate Dyrnest, Jamie, Matt, and Farzana and their team for special recognition through the Masterworks Awards. I want to give special recognition within that special recognition to Jamie von Klemperer, who's also the chair of the Forum and one of the godparents of Neighborhoods Now. Jamie, with his colleague Hannah, Van Allen's Deborah Martin, and I came together last spring to figure out how we could support community development organizations, small businesses, and cultural groups reopen safely from the pandemic. We all recognize that the city isn't built to take care of New Yorkers. We saw the extraordinary harm driven by overcrowded housing, by poor air quality and environmental health, and a lack of access to excellent public health care. Further, so many of our small businesses and cultural venues were left out of relief programs and with virtually no guidance on safely reopening. So we together set a goal of mobilizing design, legal, financial, and engineering expertise to support hard-hit neighborhoods. For 18 months, we've had the great pleasure to work with some outstanding community development organizations in 7 different communities that are home to many of our essential workers and immigrant communities. Just to give you a little sense of what we managed to accomplish, we distributed signage in 4 different languages. We navigated permitting and built outdoor restaurants. We configured offices, upgraded ventilation, hosted PPP loan workshops, strategized safe and socially distanced events, addressed longstanding building violations, and reactivated public spaces. It's the kind of work that generally doesn't win design awards, but I think it's the kind of work that we should be encouraging. So we owe a great debt of gratitude to these partners for their leadership, and also to the 200 volunteers across 70 different firms who gave their time. It was an incredibly inspiring effort and an incredibly inspiring year for us. I also want to just thank our teams at Van Allen and the Urban Design Forum who recruited each of the teams, facilitated frequent calls and fundraised for direct support to our partners. And I don't think I'm supposed to pick favorites, so I'm extra pleased to congratulate the Bed-Stuy Working Group today. I encourage you all to check out our websites and social media to learn a little bit more about all the phenomenal work that's still happening around the city, from new restaurant builds and street seats in Washington Heights and Jackson Heights to new outdoor markets in Bed-Stuy and Chinatown. We're really grateful to our lead supporters, New York Community Trust, Deutsche Bank, Altman Foundation, Citi, KPF, and Ponce de Leon Foundation. And through the incredibly generous support of Wells Fargo, we look forward to extending this support into 2022. Neighborhoods Now was just one very small effort helping New York neighborhoods recover from the pandemic, but I think we have the seed here of something much more important. which is design, engineering, law, finance, public health, all coming together and aligning in service of community development. We'd like to see a lot more of that happening in the coming years. So thank you very much to the Municipal Art Society for this recognition, and congratulations again to the Bed-Stuy Working Group.
Thank you, Dan. This makes us even more excited for the discussion that we're about to have. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator for this afternoon's discussion, Calvin Tsao. Calvin is the co-founder of the architectural firm Tsao and McCowan. He is recognized and a leading voice in contemporary architecture whose work draws from a lively engagement from various art forms. He is currently on the board of the American Academy in Rome, and I am delighted to say that he recently joined the MAS board last year, and of course, sat on our jury for these selections. Welcome, Calvin.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for that very effusive description of our work. I really appreciate it. I'm very humbled by those words. I hope I live up to it. I'm also really, I feel much privileged to be joining the Municipal Art Society, and also the privilege of being on the jury of this competition. I would say that of all the awards, this one actually had a unanimous vote. We all agreed, but we had problems trying to find a place for it. So that's why we created a special mention for this project. I'm also very, very pleased to have this amazing panel today. Let me introduce you to the speakers. James von Klemperer, who's the president and design principal at KPF, Cohn Fox Associates, where he began as an architect in 1983. And of course, he also serves as chair of the Urban Design Forum's board of directors. Dyrnest Sinckler is the executive vice president and chief operating officer for Bedford-Stuyvesant Restoration Corporation, where he has worked since 2002. And he oversees the day-to-day operations of restoration and implementation of its capital programs. Matt Grunbaum, senior associate for landscape architect at Urban Design Forum, James Corner, field operations. And his specialty is in design detailing and construction implementation. Finally, there's Farzana Gandhi, a principal architect at Farzana Gandhi Design Studio. And her practice focuses on sustainable and socially conscious solutions, both locally and abroad, and embracing an integrative and collaborative approach to design. She is also a tenured associate professor of architecture at the New York Institute of Technology. So without further ado, I would like to kick off this panel. And I would say that while we are all quarantined in 2020 and hunkering at our various homes, these people were out there doing things for the city, which I find so admirable. And one thing I always wanted to know is, how did people who are all stuck in their own homes come about forming this team and collaborate? And what were the steps involved to get to a point? I know that it started sometime in the spring of 2020, I believe. And so Jamie, Dyrnest, can you both share with us how this team had come about?
Sure.
Sorry, Dyrnest, please.
I'd be happy just to kick off and just talk a little bit about restoration and just how this whole thing came about. I think, Jamie, you can speak to that. The restoration, Bedford-Stuyvesant Restoration, is a community development organization. We're probably the first in the nation. We were established by community leaders in concert with Bobby Kennedy and Jacob Javits back in 1967. So you had a Democrat and Republican working together, a unique concept in this day and time, but it turned out to create an institution that's been here now for 54 years and provided services to the community. The purpose of restoration on the broad objective is to assist and support in the mainstreaming of a marginalized community of people in Bed-Stuy, which was comprised primarily of African Americans. The demographic has obviously been changing in recent years, but our purpose has not. We seek to implement programs that close and disrupt the racial wealth gap. This gap results in people of color and other people in not having sufficient assets to address normal challenges that occur in our everyday lives. The impact for many is the inability to achieve a decent standard of living and a productive life, which we all deserve. So sometime back in March of 2020, COVID-19 forced us to curtail vital in-person services in favor of remote service options. Sometime in mid-April, I received a call from Rachel Joseph, our Director of Operations, and she indicated that she had received a communication from the Neighborhood Now team. Prior to that, we had been struggling with the challenges of reopening. Our services are best provided in person, and we knew that at some point in the near future that we would need to reopen. The question was, how could we reopen safely? After our initial talks and sharing of site plans, the Neighborhood Now team was able to bring critical expertise and resources that were needed to restore our capacity to reopen our doors. One of the greatest, I think, challenges was giving staff a level of comfort that it was safe to return to the site. Given the support that we received and the expertise that I'm sure that both Matt and Farzana will speak to, we were able to open our doors safely. And obviously this was a great reassurance for staff. Some of the outcomes that we were able to achieve are as follows. Our Job Plus operations at our main campus and 2 remote sites were able to be restored. These sites over the years have been responsible for over 24,000 jobs for youth and adults. We are also able to partner with Department of Health and Mental Health to administer over 20,000 COVID-19 vaccinations. Couldn't have done it without proper signage, without proper spacing, without resetting our HVAC systems, and all these things I believe Matt and Farzana and James will speak to. We're also able to provide tax preparation, which is a key element of one of the services that we provide for over 2,000 people who received over $3 million in money returned. Very important in a community of our demographic. Again, we're also able to support reopening of small businesses with safety, capacity, in a safe capacity. And finally, we're able to beautify the main campus. Just a couple of things that we were able to do, but would not have been able to achieve as successfully and as smoothly without the resources and the innovation of our Neighborhood Now team. Many of the outcomes were impacted by the pandemic, but even now we continue to serve in a safe and smarter way. So thank you to Van Allen, Urban Design Forum, and Matt and Farzana. You've really helped not only restoration, but the broader community. And we continue to benefit from the work that we're able to do jointly.
So thank you, Dyrnest, and in absentia, thank you, Rachel, and everybody we worked with at BSRC. if I can just take you back, as Dyrnest began also, to the spring of 2020, to ask how this project came about. The Urban Design Forum and Van Allen Institute, normally places where issues are discussed, there's robust debate, but it's really often in both organizations historically more about talk than it is about building things or making things happen, physically and programmatically. At that point, we all remember the early days of the pandemic and well into that spring and early summer. There's a feeling at first of real fear and some kind of desperation of how we all could function. So the idea that maybe there was a way that these professionals of graphic designers, of landscape architects, mechanical engineers could actually go out and help with the re-engagement of an organization as meaningful and as purposeful as Bedford-Stuyvesant Restoration Corporation. That idea sort of came about in a flash with Deborah Martin and Dan McPhee getting together. So two organizations that don't normally collaborate all of a sudden said, let's get in the same room. And then a team was assembled very, very quickly of people we sort of knew each other, but we worked together on some projects and mostly not. But there was no question of scope or fee. So let's see what we can do to help. But even in those early days, we wondered whether we could even go out to site. Remember the first days where we put on our winter coats and went out to the plaza at BSRC, masked and wondering what was going to be safe. And but very quickly, client of Dyrnest and Rachel and architects and other designers came together as one team. It wasn't really like architect and client. It was more sort of people in a room asking, what about spacing? What about air exchange? What about paint on the ground? And what can we get done very quickly? So that engagement, I think, was really inspiring to everybody. And I have to say, Dyrnest, you're a great client. You took on really specific issues immediately. So you digested the questions, and there was what we call it community engagement. Farzana could talk about it more. And so these departments that Dyrnest talked about of social services, legal assistance, health and wellness involving food and mental wellness, business planning. He kind of got into the nitty gritty of who needed what and how. And that's an ideal client. Nothing could have happened without that kind of direct engagement. And so something began to emerge very quickly in a matter of months. We sort of understood how people could flow through and space themselves through the space. JB&B looked at air exchanges, looked at air filters, looked at what was feasible. And we were no health experts, so we had to guess what we were being told or what heard in the news from CDC. So I just want to wrap up by saying something that I think there has been for all of us involved a tremendous feeling of being in a way very fortunate to be able to do what architects and designers should do best, which is to serve the community. And not all of our work is as immediate, time-wise or otherwise, as this was. And especially for the younger staff in our firm, for Kat Cayetano, for Nels, and many others who worked on the project, there was a sense that architecture is now taken to another level of meaning. And so it sparked within our firm a group called KPF Public, which is really a volunteer group of people taking on all sorts of issues, often having to do with less advantaged communities around the world and around the city. And I think this kind of practice and design coming together is something we want to move on to implement more in the future. So for us, Dyrnest, the best thing we can do is, I think, what we're talking about now. What can we do even beyond the pandemic issues to help with other aspects of urban design as they can make a better place and a better space? having to do with streets and retail, with other aspects of community engagement. So for us, this project was tremendously important to help us actually engage, but it also has opened up doors and ideas about how the practice can change in the future. So with that, I think I turn it either back to Dyrnest or on to Farzana, who is really our expert in the practice and the way of thinking of how one engages a community.
Well, actually, Jamie, before we hand it over to Farzana and Matt, I realized I overlooked one little detail, which is for all the audiences out there. If you have a question, there's a Q&A function. If you can locate them on your screen, you, instead of using the chat, please put your questions as they come and log them into the Q&A, and we will be able to read them, and we'll get to them later after the presentation. Anyway, Jamie, I'm so impressed that you broadened the dimension of our architectural practice. But in doing so, finally, after all these years, we can break free from the cliches of what architectural practice is and really do something that's meaningful for our community, for society. Farzana and Matt, my question to you, of course, is now that you've found this great client in Dyrnest, I'm curious to see, even then, we have a variety of different stakeholders and participants, architects, landscape architects, and so on. So how did you guys collaborate? How do you work and find alignment among yourself, stakeholders, as well as the end users? How can you share with us your methodology to really glean information and insight from the stakeholders and give them something that's urgent and more? And what are the challenges doing that? And how do you integrate these current issues and problems with ongoing objectives and determine the priorities? I mean, there's so many issues to address here. So I'd love to hear.
Yeah, absolutely, Calvin. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. I think really to build on what Jamie was talking about, I think as a group, we had to really invent new ways of collaborating, right? This co-design process was really working at a number of scales, right? So first, just between all of us, right? So, we had three or four firms come together that, we'd worked before on projects, but at this point, in this particular context, there was really no defined scope between, what each one of us had to do. We each brought different expertise to the table. We had our hats on, so to speak, as landscape architects, community engagement specialists, and small business projects and small scale projects. But really, at the end of the day, we had to work as one office, and I think that was really only possible because the scopes were changing daily, and that we all had this urgency, right? We all felt this incredible need to do something and do something productive. And in some ways, I can say this, and I think I say this for the team, where we were really fortunate to be able to engage in this project because it was healing for us as well, right? March, April 2020 was a horrible time in New York City. We were all hurting. And to be able to talk through what are the issues and talk with each other, almost as a support team, to figure out what we do best, which is problem solve in terms of projects, what we can do and what's feasible, right? So I think we worked uniquely as a team. We worked also with a very unique relationship with restoration, right? Jamie, I think, was saying that our client relationship was not what is typical. There weren't schedules, there weren't, weekly, let's say, monthly check-ins with the client. that, we were making formal presentations for. It was really, okay, well, what's the next crisis? What's the next problem? What should we be handling, and how can we best facilitate that? And we were just a bunch of creative people, coming together, trying to figure out creative solutions, right? And I think the third was our relationship with the community. But Matt, before I get into that, if you had anything to add just to that,
Yeah, I was just gonna add on. The notion that we didn't have scope, I think was really important. That we all kind of came into this. The first meeting, we didn't really know what we were going to do. We had to listen to Dyrnest, hear what the issues were, hear what the priorities were, and there was also no hierarchy amongst our team. So everyone, as you mentioned, everyone kind of put on various hats, and I think the main hat was just the problem solving and trying to digest what the goals were for restoration and trying to address them as quickly as possible. We may not have had a deadline, but everything was moving so quick. No one really understood what was happening back then with how COVID spread. Now it seems so obvious, 6 foot apart, good air ventilation, but back then we weren't sure if it would spread through touch or through the air. So we had to be very nimble. And I think the design team and restoration team were very nimble throughout the process. And then the last bit I'll add, I think a lot of the success of it was that Dyrnest and his team were very direct with us on their answers, on yes, no, this is what we need. And those quick responses allowed us to really focus in on what we needed to do. So we didn't venture too far off the track on what they really needed. So I know everyone's kind of mentioned how good the client they were, and I just really want to reiterate that, because we wouldn't have been able to do as much as we did if they weren't as good of a client and as responsive to giving us answers straight off the bat.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there was this level of honesty and vulnerability amongst all of us right from the start, right? There was no, keep your tie on and, I'm so-and-so. And so that really set the stage for very open communication, right? And so, Matt, if you can share some slides we have. Part of it is engaging the community, right? Restoration has a long-standing relationship as a wonderful organization doing great work for the community. And what we wanted to do was build on that, right? So our charge was not only to help restoration open up, but also to find ways that restoration could act as a model for the rest of the community, so that the ideas we implemented on the block, in Bed-Stuy on restoration's property could then somehow translate in different ways to help, everyday citizens all over Bed-Stuy and beyond. And to do so, we wanted to hear first from the community, right? We didn't proclaim to be the experts in the room. We actually looked at the community to be the experts in the room, to understand firsthand what the challenges were and how we could help. And so we held a few virtual sessions like the slide shows. We had to invent new ways of community engagement as well. We couldn't meet in person like we usually do, right? In churches and high school gymnasiums doing exercises with stakeholders. We had to do this all on Zoom, and that brought a huge challenge in building trust, right? How do you come in when people haven't met you before? And I think we were able to rely on restoration and all of the groups that restoration has, right? That focus on arts and culture, small business, health and wellness, et cetera. And we did our own homework, and we gathered together almost 25 different stakeholders from the community, from faith-based groups, from small business, from arts and culture, from affordable housing, public housing, from departments and agencies, city agencies, community boards, et cetera. And we got them all in a Zoom room a few times, and we listened. We understood what the challenges were. We were able to meet with people via the Zoom platforms, but we also broadcasted all of our sessions on social media and put a lot of ideas on social media, encouraged people to ask questions and post questions. And we were able to reach 21,000 community residents that way. Next. Matt. So I think, New York City had a few programs in place, open restaurants, open retail, temporary street closures. These were fantastic programs. But what you found in listening to our Bed-Stuy residents was that one size doesn't fit all. These programs are great for certain communities. They work really well. But in the case of Bed-Stuy, next, Matt, where you have, existing conditions of congested sidewalks, double parking, deliveries, lots of traffic on Fulton, trash taking up lots of, really important public space in terms of sidewalks. These kinds of solutions just didn't work. No one wanted to sit in an open restaurant in a busy intersection on Fulton with the buses going by, right? And what we also found was that Fulton had been closed over the summer, and this actually exacerbated the issues in the neighborhood, right? The small businesses were hurting because there wasn't enough foot traffic. And the buses had been rerouted. And so people couldn't get to those small businesses. And so we actually found that some of those solutions had to be rethought. So we looked at also vacant lots and vacant storefronts, which unfortunately increased in the course of the pandemic. And we came up with solutions like an idea about being a good neighbor, where in a time when open space was a valuable asset, how could we use vacant lots that people owned, or even parking lots that people owned, let's say churches or schools and so on, that weren't being used in certain times of the day, and give them up to a neighbor that could use that space. For example, a dance studio or a barber could set up shop in one of these spaces. But how could that be facilitated? With open restaurants and open retail, a lot of storefronts actually couldn't use the space in front of their restaurant entities because of fire hydrants or bus stops or truck loading zones, but could use the next door space that the H&R Block wasn't using. And so how could we facilitate sort of land swaps and open space swaps between entities? And we worked with New York City agencies, DOT, DCP, as well as our legal assistants, to come up with insurance policies and legal agreements between these different constituents to make that happen. Next. And finally, the most important thing was listening with the community, but also translating and communicating to the community all of the different CDC guidelines that were changing every 5 minutes, during this time. And so we actually came up with a few different pamphlets for different audiences, the neighborhood at large, with our Be a Good Neighbor program, office workers and clients and small business owners, to put out very particular guidelines, everything from distancing and hand washing protocols and masking to, for example, in small business, the CDC put out guidelines for, and DOT put out guidelines for restaurants. But what about the small bodegas, the crowded bodegas and the hair salons that populated Bed-Stuy? So we came up with solutions and easy to follow diagrams that we disseminated to the community.
Yeah, and just building on what Farzana was talking about with more of the community outreach, one of the things we started early on and we had in our mind when we were working with restoration was that we could test things within the realm of restoration, because we could get these done rather quickly, mainly because of Dyrnest and their team, they could react very quickly. And one of the first things we started to look at was, and this was definitely led by a lot of Jamie and Nels and the KPF team, was how can we open the facilities in a safe manner, all the great services that restoration offer. So it's very simply working with Danny, the architect from restoration, and digesting all of the plan layouts and figuring out pedestrian flow, de-densification within the offices and the key areas. We brought on JB&B, who helped organize and guide us on air purification within the offices. which was extremely helpful. And then they also developed a system that was much more cost effective. I mean, air purifiers are really, really expensive. And when you have a facility as big as Restoration does, just getting the funding for that, it was next to impossible. So they had ways of doing it in a more cost-effective manner. And the other element of it was adding signage in and throughout Restoration. And again, that signage could be reused throughout the neighborhood. A lot of the signage was designed by partner and partners. And then the design team over the course of a weekend went and helped Restoration put them up in and through their facilities. So another kind of example of collaboration and everyone kind of taking their hat off and just getting down to whatever needs to be done as quick as possible. And then, of course, one of the big successes was being able to open up for the vaccination side, as Dyrnest mentioned, along with a tax side as well. So through this whole process, we were able to open it up safely, and we worked almost weekly with Dyrnest in changing some of those plans as new things needed to open, as guidelines changed. We had to be really, really nimble and really, really quick in the way we presented and digested this information. The other key component we started to work on was that Restoration has two main plazas within their site, one West Plaza and one that they call the amphitheater. These are used for major events for the community, such as anything from a cinema to a tented reception in the amphitheater. We really wanted to make sure that they could have something there that was safe, that would have social distancing, but also in a way allow people to know that they're back up and running for events and that does feel safe. And this is where that level of a simple beautification with planting, we had an idea that we would create these 6-foot social distancing squares that each would have a mural that would be designed by an artist that's local to the community. And of course, that needed a bit more funding than we had at the time. So to react very quickly to this, we created a very simplified version, which is what you see on screen here. All of the paint and material was actually donated by Home Depot. And we were able to go out there over the course of 3 weekends. Again, various groups from the design team, from Restoration as well, just to paint these out. A very quick way of doing it. And, in the idea that in the future, if we get more funding or more interest, that they could become these artistic murals. The other element of it was, as we mentioned, the greening. So planters are very expensive. So one of the first things we did was start to reach out to companies that we have worked with in New York, and we're very lucky that Blondie's Treehouse responded to us rather quickly and just said, we'll donate plants, we'll donate the materials. But not only that, they donated their staff for a day. So we had a really amazing day of bringing these plants in, greening up the areas, very much giving it more of a sense of place, signifying that Restoration is open for these events within a safe and social manner. But not only on the outside, we started to put indoor plants. This was actually used as a taxation site. So really trying to just get a level of comfort, of beautification within the inside and outside of Restoration. And then the last piece we did a community build day. This was filmed, and this was sent out over Instagram and various social media handles on how to build a very affordable barrier for your restaurant or bodega or whatever it may be. And this was led by AE Superlab, who we worked closely with. But again, it was successful, and a lot of the material was donated by Home Depot. Again, we're very lucky to have that on hand.
This is all so much amazing. My question is, you really managed to bring stakeholders together very quickly during a time where normal means of congregation is denied, and you could manage to get all these people from a variety of different areas to come together on Zoom and hear them out. I'm still quite impressed at how you managed to allow people to have alignment of priorities, because obviously different groups have different goals. And I would love to hear from you a little bit more about how you manage to find alignment among such disparate groups, and also this being iterative. It seems that the process is very opportunistic, very local, and iterative. And how it'd be interesting to know that with all the accomplishment you've made this time, what you've learned, and what do you think if you need to do it again? What have you learned from this experience?
Can I just would like to just throw something out there. This entire process that we've been through is really an encouragement, not only for restoration, but for the entire community. In going back to 1967, Bobby Kennedy had indicated that no single source or no single company or corporation could provide what Bed-Stuy needed. That in order to really have an impact, that you needed to have a combination of private enterprise with public and community. And the reason I believe that this initiative worked so well is that because the team listened. They didn't come in with, as was initially mentioned, a predetermined model that had to be imposed on the community. But they came, they looked, they listened to what we needed, and were quick to bring resources that were able to respond and to come up with solutions. And that type of initiative and that type of cooperation is what was key in making this a successful endeavor. We were able to get ahead of the COVID curve, as I'm calling it, and restoration was able to model behavior so that other not-for-profits, nonprofits were able to see what we were able to do, and basically to take comparable actions to open up their facilities and to continue to provide really essential services. So again, everyone is complimenting restoration for being a good client, but the team that we worked with, Farzana, Nels, and Matt, and Allen Institute and Urban Design Forum, made the introduction. They opened up their doors, and I'm going to say they opened up their hearts. And that's what made the biggest impact, continues to make an impact. And I'm looking forward to continuing to continue to work with this team.
Thank you, Dyrnest. That's really wonderful. Well, I think it's time for us to open up for some Q&A. We have three pretty interesting questions. One, of course, was from Lynn Grifo, and she said that perhaps she missed it, but who assembled the team at the outset, and how was it brought together, and who decided which disciplines need to take part? I think we can quickly go through, answer that question. I think
I can offer it really came from Deborah Martin and Dan McPhee, because we're looking not just at BSRC at Bed-Stuy, but also Washington Heights, Corona Park, Jackson Heights, and sort of quickly asked architects to talk with people who they also knew could volunteer from other disciplines. So it was kind of, Dan McPhee can explain better, but it was a little bit ad hoc. Nobody fussed too much about it. What's my first pick? Which neighborhood do you want to work on? Who will you work with? We weren't getting married for life. We were just trying to get off the dime. And again, I can't stress enough the feeling of some emergency that was felt all around the world, and that we've all seen, not just in this little piece of work, but in so many cities around the world, in Paris, in Cairo, wherever, how design can deal with a terribly, terribly worrisome situation. And I think we may find this in the future more and more, if there are issues of resiliency, issues of social justice that we need to do something about, there will be such ad hoc combinations and almost like a pickup team in baseball or soccer, or get out in the street and take a ball and do something with it. It feels good to actually get something done.
You still need someone to, to kick it off, right?
Yeah. So if they were masterminds, it's the two, like MAS, the membership organizations around New York, and there are many of them, Architecture League, Urban Design Forum, Van Allen, MAS, more, so many exist to make a difference, and we don't always see that difference. Here we did, but we're blessed with such a rich culture, I think, of boards and volunteers and people who care in all of these groups.
Well, I would say that New York is pretty special with all these peeps, stakeholders, and instigators who really care. And if I hear you right, you're saying that even though there are certain organizations that start initiated it really there's a collective energy, people volunteering, people coming in, volunteer services. So that's great.
Calvin, if I may just add one thing. I think that we're talking about different disciplines coming together, and absolutely UDF and Van Allen really kicked us off with a structure that said, okay, we're going to need someone really an expert in architecture, landscape, retail, etc., on these various teams. But at the end of the day, I think the most successful teams were those that put our disciplines aside. And we actually removed those hats, and every session was a brainstorming session, right? We brought our different expertise and points of view to the table. And I would actually include the client and community in that group, right? Every meeting was never a presentation of ideas. It was actually a brainstorming session. So we were actually working with each other and with the community to come up with ideas. And that's where, stakeholder disagreements and things align, because everyone voices right up front the issues and the challenges that, one might have in mind with a certain solution. And everyone's talking, oh, okay, well, yes, you're right. That's not going to work because so-and-so has said it, has brought this idea to the table. Let's think of it in a different way, right? And it was very nimble and, I would say a co-design process in that way.
Just add, I think just to add to that, it's no one was precious about any decision or any idea they put on the table. So no one felt wedded to it. So someone could make a statement, Dyrnest could say, let's move on, we got to get on something else, and then we would. And I think that was really key. And I think it goes back to there was no scope boundaries with what people were doing. And there were some weeks where, for example, we didn't have enough staff or the lift to produce a drawing or something that would be typically within our scope. And, someone from one of the other teams would pick it up and vice versa. So, we weren't precious about our boundaries, weren't precious about our ideas. We had the goal in mind whenever we were approaching something and took it that way, and really just tried to listen to Dyrnest and the team and tried to be as nimble as possible.
We're always working in silos, and this is the one time I think we were able to really, challenge that in a really productive way. So,
well, that sounds wonderful. I mean, just wondering, that's a question for me actually. That usually when you're all these embarrassment of riches in terms of ideas and collaborations, surely you have a moderator or someone who can actually sort it out. Editor. I mean, a novelist still needs an editor, right? So to kind of help shape it. I was wondering, how that works. But is that aside, I'd like to say that actually some of the other questions you've actually answered, which is, that what inspiration can other organizations, other neighborhoods can take from this experience? And I think you answered that pretty well. So there are three more questions, and I think this might be the end of all the questions before we wrap up. One of them is, did you collaborate with any mutual aid networks on any neighborhoods now, locations work to meet community needs? And if so, did you have volunteers involved in this work?
Yeah, I can take that. So that was the incredible thing about the pandemic, right? That overnight, in the span of a month or so, I think there's an article out there that says there were 50 plus mutual aid groups that popped up in Brooklyn alone, and it's to the credit of the community, right? It's about community helping each other and coming together, even without our help. And so, of course, you want to tap into that wonderful infrastructure that the community is setting up for themselves, right? So, I do remember reaching out to a number of those mutual aid groups and, asking them for feedback on our ideas. And, for our community build days and so on, we definitely reached out to, people within limits of social distancing and how many people we could have on site. That was the big challenge. But, we did reach out and we got a lot of people that were interested in helping out in different ways.
That's great. And another question is, have you seen other cities attempting similar collaborations? I would say that it certainly floored me what you've done. But did you come across inspirations from other areas, other places, other people?
Yeah, I think we did. One thing that, again, both Van Allen and UDF did was to invite city planners and managers from around the world in separate sessions to come and talk to New Yorkers about how they were handling their situation. So the chief planner of Singapore and of Stockholm, where the routine was very different as regards distancing and lockdown and so on, but talked about sort of also consensual collaboration of groups. So I think it's something you'll find movements like this worldwide dealing with this very problem. And one more thing I thought we should just add to the mix, and maybe others want to comment on this, but overlaid onto this health emergency was also the welling up of concern over social justice issues, in particular, the murder of George Floyd. And that was not a small thing in our world, in particular, the world of BSRC and the neighborhoods. So, BSRC is right there, the Black Lives Matter mural, right on the ground, right at the doorstep. So, these issues are not divorced from each other. And I think it was cause for even more focused thinking and sharing.
So, someone for David Buckman has a question. Were there guidelines prepared that may help set up similar community efforts where needed?
So, yeah, Calvin, I'll just answer that real quick. I think you can think about guidelines in two ways, right? Guidelines for the structure of such a collaboration, which I think, I'll let Jamie or Dan step in and talk about, or the guidelines for various initiatives for COVID assistance, right? And so Matt and I and the KPF team were very, very committed to developing ideas that could be translated to other communities. And so a lot of that is documented in some of the pamphlets that we put together that are available on the UDF and Van Allen websites. But Jamie and Dan, if you can talk about the structure and how that might be translated in other places.
I think, Dan, if you're still on, you might want to talk about follow-on ideas for future engagement.
Yeah, so we did make all of the resources available by the initial teams on neighborhoodsnow.nyc. So if you're interested to learn a little bit more about some of the initial designs, we're actually working to update that with all the recent work as well. So stay tuned for that in the next couple of months. But this work is certainly informed by community design efforts across the country and around the world. And I think we really benefit from interviews and learning with so many different community design organizations in Philadelphia, New Orleans, Baltimore, and elsewhere. So they've really been an incredible series of partners. It's like this wonderful community of folks that want to help one another to do this kind of work. And I know that even as a result of this partnership together, we have inspired Boston to set up a similar effort through the BSA. So it's great to see that this work continues to grow. And I think the big challenge now is to figure out how to make it sustainable. So we're really grateful to be working with Wells Fargo this year, who have made additional resources available so that we can not just do a lot of the planning, but actually a lot of the implementation of plans that have been defined over the last 2 years. But we look forward to figuring out how can we actually make it so that practitioners who are working around the city can have this channel for engagement. They can participate when they can, get more involved in their neighborhoods and in the broader city. And so I think that's the big challenge for the forum to figure out in the next couple of years.
And Dan, if I can add, if there are any funders who are listening, a project like this paves the way. So we're now looking at a project in Trenton for a shelter, which could be made out of a kind of a brownfield site, urban area. But knowing or being able to talk about neighborhoods now as something that actually happened and did make a difference is very heartening to those who want to put their sweat or their equity behind a project that is not about traditional professional services. And the last thing I'll say is I think this kind of projects I intimated earlier changes the professions of design. It changes the firms and the culture within the firms of what architects and designers think they can do as part of their everyday job.
Thank you. I think this is pretty much a wrap up. I'm going to hand it over to Elizabeth. We'll have a few closing words.
Well, my first words are thank you. This has been a hugely interesting discussion. Thank you to Dyrnest and Matt and Farzana and Jamie and Dan for joining us and jumping in as needed, and Calvin for your masterful moderation here. You have all done incredible work here, and it's hugely inspiring for all of us in this world, both in terms of thinking about what we can do in our neighborhoods, but also how we work differently together. And I think that's really fabulous. So thank you all for joining us today. We're very grateful that you took time in the middle of your day to join us for this discussion. And if anyone missed it, they can find it on the Municipal Arts Society's YouTube channel later. So all is not lost. And for those of you who are interested in the other programs we're doing in this series, on Friday, we're going to be talking about a very different project, very large, very big infrastructure project, a Masterworks Award that went to LaGuardia Airport's Terminal B. So if you'd like to join us on Friday, we would be delighted to have you. And thank you to all of our panelists for all your fine work, most importantly, and for joining us today for this very inspiring panel.